Hey there, this is Scotty Campbell without my Wardenaires, and you're listening to the Northern Report.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, friends. Welcome to the Northern Report. I'm your host, Sean Burns, and I'm coming right at you from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. Here on the Northern Report, I aim to shine a light on emerging and existing Canadian talent, as well as some of the legends we're still lucky to have with us. My guest on today's show is Scotty Campbell. For a period of about 15 years, there was no country music outfit in Canada more authentic than Scotty Campbell. He set the bar high for honky-tonk up here with his hurtin opus, 1999's Damned If I Recall. After settling on a new, more permanent outfit, branded as the Wardenaires, the group's experience and efforts culminated in their 2008 release, Smokin and Drinkin. Now, I've been on record stating on multiple occasions on Boots and Saddle and in social situations that Smokin and Drinkin is the finest country music album to come out of Canada in the first decade of the 2000s. Scotty transitioned out of live performance about 10 years ago, but remains a good and loyal citizen of country music. No doubt about it, Scotty knows his shit, and he comes by it honestly. I could talk to this guy for hours, but for the purposes of the podcast, here's about 45 minutes or so of our chat. Friends, I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with Hamilton, Ontario's Scotty Campbell. You know, man, it's not much different now than it was when you were making records consistently. It's like there's very few people that are making traditional sounding country music in Canada.
Yeah, I think there's probably very few anywhere. But the thing is that much like then, you kind of had to seek it out. When I started, I played in a number of bands before I started doing my own thing. I played in a bunch of bands that were, sort of the same bent that I was, but there was a few bands around at the time. And of course, Yoakum had just come around, Randy Travis and George Strait had just sort of become, the bigger, it was sort of a traditionalist revival in the mid to late 80s. And, that's when kind of country music was pretty strong there for about a decade. And then, I think around the time when Garth Brooks hit, there was still, by comparison to now, it still felt like country music, but it just exploded in such a way that, in Canada it wasn't much different. Like all of a sudden everybody was a country singer and, but most of them, they weren't. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah, it was, but that was around the time and, that I first kind of kicked it in. And mine was kind of by accident. I was playing in another band and I entered some songwriting contests and stuff. And then when people started noticing it, I was just sort of still young enough to believe that something might happen. So I started pounding away at it, for probably about 15 or more years. It was steadily doing better and better, but it was tough because by the time I got noticed, I was already, in my 30s and I had a mortgage.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a little dicey, but I mean, most people didn't know it. Our visibility was such that I was one of those guys, I had a job for like 15, 16 years. So I had 6 weeks holidays every year. I could build tours around that. And a lot of people thought we were a full-time band, but we never were.
You guys had a weekly at the Cadillac Lounge on Sundays, though. Am I right with that?
Yeah, like 13 years, yeah.
And that was like your kind of, at least you had one a week, even if you were grinding out Monday to Friday.
Yeah, it was something that, after a while, I think maybe about halfway or 3/4 of the way through that period, we took it down to about once a month because, you have to look at demand as well. I mean, it was hard to keep it going that much, but it was a very, very long house gig. And plus, we like to do some tours and stuff. So you'd have to take some time away from the gig or find somebody to take your slot, that kind of thing.
So like going back to the beginning, I guess, you grew up in the Maritimes?
No, I was born there, but I grew up here.
In Toronto or in the Hammer?
Hamilton. always.
Always Hamilton through and through.
Yeah, I got sort of known as a Toronto artist because the rest of the band, although a couple of them were once, the bass player and the guitar player were once, and the drummer Teddy were once Hamilton guys. They had been in Toronto for years at that point. So even when I would play at home, I don't know, my peers kind of tended to treat me like an outlander. So not in a bad way or anything. It's just one of those things. I mean, I was always there. I never played here. I had like one or two gigs that I was able to play here. So yeah, I always seemed like I was from somewhere else.
Were you exposed to country music growing up?
Oh, nonstop. I actually never listened to anything but rock and roll. Never made sense to me. It was kind of my brother's music, and I liked sort of the old doo-wop stuff. But I grew up on Sinatra, and my mother loved Broadway musicals and like Nat King Cole and things like that. And so I grew up on that and a lot of Italian music because we lived in a particularly Italian district. And that was the kind of thing I grew up on. But my father and mother also being from the Maritimes, I mean, they were, my dad was a fiddle player. So the country music was constantly on in my house. Like I still have vivid memories. I mean, I can see it like it was yesterday. On Saturdays, my dad would go buy a record, and my mom and him would do groceries. And I can still remember the day he came in with like Stonewall Jackson's greatest hits, and that was all he played for months. And then that was supplanted by Charlie Pride's greatest hits, and plus we had a massive vinyl collection, much of which I blew it into thousands of albums, which I had to finally get rid of, but I kept those ones I'm speaking of, certain handful. I figure when I die, I'm going to leave them to people.
Nice, so, yeah.
I have a live album of the Ernest Tubb had a TV show back then, and so did Carl Smith, and I have a couple of live records that were made off that, with like the Wilburn Brothers performing, and a very, very young Loretta Lynn, stuff like that.
Wow, that must be really cool to hear. I love the idea of the regional TV shows and the national shows, like the old country music show. I watch a lot of Buck Owens Ranch show or Porter Wagner on YouTube and stuff, and it's like a really kind of gone, disappeared thing.
Yeah, and it stemmed from radio. I mean, the Opry is the one everybody talks about, and surely it was a great show, but there's nobody in the Maritimes, nobody from down east that didn't grow up on the Wheeling Jamboree, which was from Wheeling, West Virginia. And then there was the Renfro Valley Barn Dance, which I believe was from the Ozarks. And every region had their little show. And of course, the Louisiana Hayride, which was almost as big as the Opry. But all of these shows produced regional stars. Like I think the Renfro Valley Barn Dance was the home of Red Foley. And, almost all of these, because, this mass exposure communication didn't exist then. So you could be a regional star. I mean, there was a guy on the Wheeling Jamboree named Doc Williams and his wife Chicky, and they had a traveling show, and they were gods in the East Coast, even though they were from, somewhere sort of mid-South,
So what was the scene like in Toronto when you started going to bars to listen to bands?
Well, when I started playing music, I mean, I was fresh out of high school, so I was in like a new wave band. We were playing like The Clash and The Jam and stuff like that. And so, it's going through that period because again, this was the first time sort of music, rock and roll kind of made sense to me. I went to England when I was like 15 or 16 and, we saw The Clash in a bar. And so it was just like, it was one of those moments where time stopped. And I went, I don't know what this is, but I want some of it. And I did that right out of high school as a full-time musician playing in a band. It was called Slick, S-L-I-K. And I did that for about 5, but that scene died away. And I really didn't play music for about 2 years. And then around the, I guess late 80s, I put together a band called the Cadillac Cowboys. And and it was them, it was us, and I think the only other evidence I could find of until the traditional thing hit mainstream, the only other band I could really remember at the time was a band called the Wardenaires.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, Marty, what the hell is his name? As I get older, man, my shit fades. But I mean, Monty Warden, was the lead singer, and they were a really good country band. They put out 2 records on A&M, and I never really. I think I ran into Monty one time in Nashville, and I think they did some reunion gigs recently. Actually, it's one of those things. If you hang around long enough, you become a bit of a legend, even though at the time you couldn't get arrested. And that's what I'm waiting for. Right? That's what's going to happen because. I basically got sidelined out of music in 2012-ish, a little later, maybe a couple of years after that, just through a career thing. I lost a job I'd had for many, many, many years, and I'm like 50, and I'm like, wow, what do I do? I have a house to finish paying for and all this stuff. And I wound up working for my drummer Teddy's moving company. I'm 50 and I'm lifting stuff up and down staircases, like honestly, sometimes 20 hours a day with kids at my age. So it was like, I just couldn't, to be fair though, I have to say that it was over about 2 or 3 years before it was over. It was getting almost impossible. We had, gotten into doing a lot of big festivals and stuff, but, the music was starting to change quite a bit around that time. And between that and what happened ultimately career-wise, I just couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't finish at 10, 11 o'clock at night from schlepping furniture all day and then go show up somewhere and play. And so, yeah, the band actually, though, has continued on without me. They because my drummer who is like still my best friend, was one of the best singers I've ever heard in my life. Like we had 4-part harmonies on stage so he was able to slide right into the lead vocal spot, keep the band together. They call themselves Felonious Hank.
Oh, yeah, and, man. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. And that's basically the entire band without me. They have more of a revolving cast of characters where I had more of a fixed... The unit that you hear on Smokin and Drinkin is pretty much the way I held the band for about the last, say, maybe decade of my time. I had the first, I will say, if I was doing it for, I don't know how many years, solo-wise, I had a certain band for the first, say, 6, and then I was getting so busy, and they all had full-time jobs that I stepped in with the other guys, and that's when Teddy came in, and Pete, and Burt Carroll, and that was the band that, the first band is on Damned If I Recall, the second band is on Smokin and Drinkin, and I love both those records. But what's really funny, until Teddy or somebody posted, Sam from the Cadillac Lounge posted April's Fool last week. I hadn't listened to that record, and I don't think I ever realized how good it sounds. It's actually a really beautiful album, and it never occurred to me how good it was until, honestly, the last week or so I've been playing it a lot. It kind of makes me almost a little sad, but I can handle it. It's not a big deal. But yeah, it's one of those things where I look back. It was supposed to be a covers album, and at the last second, a bunch of songs jumped into my head, and so I threw them on. But sorry, I guess to go back to your question, there wasn't a lot going on around the time, I guess, again, late 80s when I first started doing it. I hadn't quite imagined I'd do a solo thing. Handsome Ned, I think, was dead by that point. And in fairness to Ned, I know he's become a bit of a legend. Ned wasn't very good. I mean, I remember going into one time, me and my guitar player, with the guy who was on Smokin and Drinkin, Bob Reed was his name, Robert. And I remember he was telling me this story one time, and he was like the first guy that ever kind of saw my eye. And I appreciated what Ned was doing. I really do. He was trying really hard, but Bob cut me off explaining almost exactly as I'm saying to you now. He goes, one time I walked into the Cameron house, and there was Handsome Ned. I listened for about a minute. He played all the wrong chords to Hey Good Looking. I walked out, and I've never seen him again. And... and it's one of those things. You tell that story, people look at you. Back when I was, much more. I was kind of lippy on purpose for many years, and now I'm just lippy because I'm me. But people tend to, they sneer at that a little bit. But it's true. He was trying to do something really, really good. But I mean, it was like a lot of people who jump onto a traditional thing. I mean, I feel like it was a new toy for Ned. I think if Ned had lived longer, he would have done something else later.
Yeah. And so when you start making the scene, I guess shortly before your first album, and are you catching the end of the six nighters and the taverns and stuff like that? Those kinds of bands? Are you going to see those bands?
Yeah. Well, see, that's where Teddy came from, my drummer, and that's where I came from. I mean, even when I was starting off with my first band, playing the new wave thing. I mean, we started off, the first thing they did with you was send you away for we'd do 13 weeks through Northern Ontario, a scene that doesn't exist anymore. And, you'd go from, say Sudbury, and you'd work your way all the way up to Manitoba and then come back. And then when you got a little better, you could crack Manitoba and head into Calgary and start doing some of those better clubs. Well, even in country, it was kind of the same, but the Northern circuit had disappeared by that time. But I was still doing, I could go out and I was holding down a full-time job at the same time. I could go out and do, I think the first 2 or 3 years I was doing six-nighters. And it was a great, I mean, that's something that, all old guys will, I'm probably the last generation that did it, but that's something that you honed your craft. I mean, playing covers and first of all, in country, playing covers is completely acceptable at any level. So, and I played covers. My covers were just so incredibly obscure that almost everybody thought they were my tunes.
What year did you land on the band and sort of settle in with that group of Ted and Pete and Bob and Burke?
Well, I guess time is not my best friend as far as my memory goes, but it was probably about a year after. Or no, maybe 3 or 4 years after Damned If I Recall. I was getting busier, but the other band, again, they all had full-time gigs, and they were quite a bit older than me. And so I went to see Teddy. He was drumming for a girl, doesn't matter, I can't come up with her name, but Tina, I remember the first name. And Teddy and I had known each other just from being Hamilton guys. We'd known each other for years, but I would run into him and we would just talk nonstop. And he's one of my favorite people, one of the funniest guys I've ever known, probably one of the most passionate musicians I've ever known. But he was always known as this journeyman. And in Hamilton, he had cultivated this reputation as a bit of a drunk. He spread the rumor that he drank too much. And because I never saw any evidence of it. It was just self-examination, right? So but he had kind of picked up that reputation. But what was left out of the equation was that how incredibly talented he was. And so he's most people don't think of him as a drummer. He's an excellent drummer. Most people do think of him as a singer, but listening, this one night we ran into each other and we just started talking, and he said, we should do it, man. We should you and me should just do something here. And he said, Pete Sisk is still around. I go, wow, because Pete has been a member of the Cadillac Cowboys way, way back. And it's funny because I didn't remember Pete as a fantastic bass player. I remembered him as a good bass player. And as soon as he came to the first rehearsal of what we were going to be, it was just like, oh my God, does anybody lay down single note space country like this guy? I mean, I don't think there is. I remember listening to Dwight Yoakam doing I'll Go Back to Her, an old Waylon Jennings tune. I was listening to it and I go, if Pete would play this better, because the bass player plays approaches, ba-boom, ba-boom, but Pete would just be boom, boom. I mean, and so on a ballad, there's nobody like him, and he just shuffles like he was born to it. And him and Ted he had been in one of Ted had a cover band called Jack Diamond. They did make some records, but the Jack Diamond band, and Pete was in that for quite a number of years. So again, these guys were, boy, your bass and drummer better be related if you're going to play music. And as far as steel players go, although Burke was our guy most of the time, Canada is pretty fortunate, in Ontario in particular, because there's about a half dozen steel players in this country, and most of them are in Ontario, that could play with anybody, anywhere, anytime. Al Briscoe, Burke Carroll, Bob Tyfair, Doug Johnson. I mean, these guys could play with anybody, anytime. And so I always had a top guy. If my guy was missing, I grabbed another guy, and it didn't matter. I just got a different flavor. You know what I mean? Like Doug always plays Emmons, and Burke always plays a Falaka. And and they have very different styles. But and I used a guy named Wiz Feinberg who it's funny actually. Wiz doesn't even remember actually ever playing with me, and he played with me like a dozen times. And but yeah, so it was just, I think Teddy was as responsible for putting. And the band before was called the Country Squires. It was Scotty Campbell and the Country Squires. And when it became me and Teddy and Pete Sisk and Burt Carroll and Robert Reed, they decided their name was going to be the Wardenaires, which I knew as soon as I heard it, it was from Pete and Ted. And they, I'm not an argumentative man. I just said, oh yeah, okay, that's what you want your name. If that's what you want your name to be, that's what it'll be. So yeah, Teddy was as responsible for anything musically that I was able to pull off. I mean, business-wise, we had a beautiful understanding where we paid everybody else and then we split what was left.
Mm-hmm.
And 90% of the time that was, that left us relatively broke and everybody else sort of happy. But in the same token, they were all kind of troopers. I mean, Bob is still out in Kitchener these days, but Bob was in the band for years. The last, say, 3 years, he was replaced by a guy named Nickel Robertson.
Oh, man, he's a monster, too.
Yeah, well, Teddy grabbed him out of nowhere. No one knew who Nickel was. He was a baby. Ted had seen him jamming at something and just said, I have a feeling this kid could play country. And he's just a monster. I mean, he could play with anybody, anywhere. The only difference is that Robert, our original guy, being a guy who was in his 60s, he looked like he was 40, but he was in his 60s when he was with us. He grew up like on the old stuff, and I mean his rhythm hand was second to none. Even Nickel will tell you, like, yeah, geez, I wish I had the goddamn rhythm hand. And of course, and again, he was also in the Jack Diamond Band with Ted and Pete. So I got this ready-made rhythm section that was just unbelievable.
I was going to say that those guys definitely had some dirt underneath their fingernails, and they were a band already. So, yeah, and playing cover songs largely. So joining up with you must have been a breath of fresh air for them as well. Yeah,
it was, I think, and also, I mean, on some level, it's funny, we're sort of past that train of thought now, but we'll go back 20 years. Is it 20 years? I don't know. However many years, when we a few years before Smokin and Drinkin, we'll say 6-7 years before that, we I think they still, like me, thought, well, this guy, he gets a lot of attention. They would write about me everywhere I went and that kind of thing. And I think that, wow, we may actually get one last kick at the can here. Let's see if we can make this thing happen or not. And I think we all also agreed at some point, without ever saying it, that it wasn't going to happen. And it was around that time, Pete went off to play with the Good Brothers, and he was only 6 months of the year gig, but it was a real dough. He was making good money, traveling and seeing the world and that kind of thing. But yeah, it was Teddy, other than running a moving company, he still he'd go off and do things with other people, and I never played without Teddy. That just wasn't my thing. I could. Anybody else, okay, I didn't like to put anybody else in and out, but I could. But Teddy, I never played without Teddy. I'm like Yogi Berra and Casey Stengel. Somebody asked Casey one time, like, what's your secret? He goes, I never play without my man. And basically what he was saying, because he would put he put Barrett in the outfield. Then he'd put him, he was a catcher, and then he'd make him a designated hitter if they were playing anything. I mean, he just never, and I never played without Ted, because I could have the shittiest band in the world, but vocally, him and I were like related. It was, and we still are, to be honest with you. Occasionally, I'll go to a Thelonious Hank gig, and we'll get up because they still cover a few of my tunes, they still do a lot of country. They just give it this jazz flavor. And because, most of the band was in my band, we, even when he gets subs in, they're the same subs I got. So, so yeah, I mean, it's like old home week. I will go up and do a whole bunch of songs, and we'll just, Teddy and I still sing like we were born to each other.
You mentioned Smokin and Drinkin a couple of times, and it's something I've always actually wanted to talk to you about, because beyond the subtleties of the sounds of traditional country music, you guys really seem to encapsulate and recreate this, vintage honky-tonk culture and sound and aesthetic. I've called it the finest country music record out of Canada in the first 10 years of the century. Can you tell me about like where you guys recorded that, how you selected the tunes? Because as you said, it's a mixture of songs you wrote and some great cover tunes. And I know that Sean Ashby was also involved.
Yeah, well, Sean kind of saved it. We were recording it at this little studio above a factory in Toronto. It's kind of a disaster. It was one of these things where the guy who, and I won't say his name because he's a great guy and I don't want to hurt his feelings, but he, and it was a long time ago. We started cutting the bed tracks. He played in a Juno Award-winning band back in the 70s and stuff, and he was a good friend of ours. And we would use him occasionally to sub in because he was one of these savants too. He was a piano player by trade, but he sang like a bird. He could fill in on a lead guitar. He could play. We took him on tour as a bass player once, and anyway, so he had the studio. So we went in and we were going to cut some tracks, and we thought, well, if it sounds good, we'll make a record out of it. And it just got to be so tedious because he couldn't get up in the morning. So like, Burke, our steel player, would go there to do sessions. Burke, who's, only playing steel for a living and, time is money kind of thing. And he'd be waiting for 5-6 hours for this guy to get his shit together. And so we kind of rescued it. And Teddy and Sean were roommates all the years that Sean got his start in the Jack Diamond Band as well. And then he went on to, of course, great fame and playing The Tonight Show with Sarah McLachlan and all that stuff. And so, but he, he got into producing and I knew he understood real country music because he could play it. And Sean's a just pretty amazing musician, a very strange cat, but I mean, a fabulous musician. When I say strange, it's almost always in a good way.
Oh, yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean with Sean.
Oh, yeah, and so Ashby, he said he would save it for us, and so Teddy and him talked it out, and so we went to Catherine North Studios, which is where I cut Damned If I Recall, and Sean had a bit of an in there, and he said, the bed tracks are good, man, and there were the bed tracks, like the rhythm section, basically bass, drum, rhythm guitar, that's all one take. And it's all played at the same time. None of this, there's nothing added in. And then the vocals, we did what we could, but Sean just said, we have to redo them. And I think he posted on Facebook the other day when I posted that tune. Yeah, I don't remember it, but I know he knows what he's talking about. The vocals are all one take.
Nice.
We just got Teddy to do the Ted Hawkins Singers, and he came in and he did all the harmonies are him, which kind of pissed me off because on Tender Love and Care I did my own harmony and he went over it. So, but you know what? Sometimes other people know what's best for you. So, and he is pretty much my favorite harmony singer anyway. So, Sean saved it. He even went over the guitar track on Smokin and Drinkin. He played it, and yeah, it came out, and again, it around not too much. My career started sort of sliding and slowing down, maybe a year after that, and because of that, perhaps I don't think I ever listened to that record very much until about a week ago, and I just think it sounds great.
It's a great record, man.
Yeah, it sounds a lot better than I remembered, and I don't know if it's busyness or mood or what the hell. I mean, I've always thought Damned If I Recall is my best work, and I still do think so. But I put that one even, Stephen, just a very different sounding record. It's much more live. It definitely captured the band. Some of my vocals are slightly imperfect in spots, and I'm okay with it. Because again, it feels right, Yeah,
you're capturing a real performance. Like, were those songs already a part of the live show, or were they set aside for the record?
Some 50-50, I think. We played He's Got Away with Women so long. I mean, I knew Hank Thompson fans who'd never heard the song. I mean, it was one of those obscure covers that almost everybody thought it was mine. Mm-hmm. And so when I went to credit it, April Fool's, same thing. I've been playing that song forever. It's a Jack Green tune. But I mean, I don't know any Jack Green fans who've ever heard it. You know what I mean? Yeah. It was off a very obscure gospelish sort of album called Lord Is It Mine. And, I wish I had a copy of the record in front of me. I can't really remember everything that's on it, but, and I always wanted to do a Buck Owens ballad So I did Your Tender Love and Care, and then I wrote Genie in a Bottle, which is pretty much a Buck Owens ballad. It sounds almost actually like Buck Owens is All I Want for Christmas Is My Daddy. You can almost sing it to Genie in a Bottle, but it kind of veers off its course at some points. But I didn't realize it when I was doing it. But yeah, that happened. Every now and then I'll feel something. And I think on Damned If I Recall, the fact that Glenn Campbell never sued me for, what the hell was that song? The Only Flame in Town. I mean, Jesus, it is Gentle on My Mind. I mean, good Lord. I'm surprised I never got called on that. But well, that's one of the beauty of never getting played in the radio. No one knows.
Hey there again, folks. We have ventured beyond the halfway point of today's episode, and I'd like to thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Northern Report podcast. I'm your host, Sean Burns, and our guest today is Scotty Campbell. I'll remind you to follow along with the Northern Report podcast and our playlist on Spotify. Subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts. Listen on YouTube, our Anchor.fm homepage, or wherever you find your podcasts. Never one to be afraid to speak his mind, Scotty, backed by his veteran band, the Wardenaires, fought hard for a seat at the table. Scotty carved out a respectable audience, consistent press, and positive reviews, but unfortunately still did not get the credit he was due as a sincere performer and torchbearer of beautiful country music in Canada. Far too country for commercial radio, more knowledgeable and legit than most of their peers, the band stayed true to the music they loved while holding a long-standing residency at Toronto's Cadillac Lounge and touring the taverns, bars, honky-tonks, and festival stages all across this country. I was more than happy to speak with Scotty in depth about Smokin and Drinkin, and during the course of our conversation, we traveled down many avenues of country music. We got a little sidetracked discussing Harlan Howard and his incredible catalog of songs, as well as his solo records. I'll spare you our little nerd out, and we'll jump back into it now to pick up at the end of that train of thought and dive in to the back half of Scotty's touring and recording career. Next.
I wrote his obituary, and I had been in Nashville the weekend he died, and I was driving home when I found out about it, and so I wrote just one of those, I like to write, and so I just wrote an obituary for him, and somebody through hook and crook, somebody at BMG or RCA somehow managed to get it to his widow. It was the only thing read at his funeral.
Wow, man.
I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah, that's some country music royalty.
Yeah, she came and met me a year later at the at the Country Music Awards, and she cried all over my shoulder. It was nice.
So you were attending these country music awards and stuff like that, even though there seems to have not been a place for traditional bands, at those events.
Well, originally, I kind of was still under the delusion that I could be part of it. And then after that, it was completely, I was just there to spoil the party. We, everywhere the Canadian Country Music Awards was, we would do a gig outside of it and draw tons of industry people and friends that we had made and other musicians and stuff. And, the first few years, I was just making friends, trying to get something happening. There was a couple of other artists that there was a guy named Curtis Grambo that I became really really good friends with, still am to this day. And he's a fucking incredible country singer. And his first album was called Big News Back Home. And I actually, I'll send you a couple of tracks off it. I think you'd dig it. So he was, just a good excuse to go and drink and party and be around people who are, trying to do the same thing you are. And even if they're going about it different ways. And I kind of took it too far one time where I think the awards were in Ottawa, and I was really starting to get a bit of a profile back then. So I did 6 interviews in an afternoon. and I just slagged the shit out of everybody, all my peers, and of course they printed every word of it. And the next day, man, I showed up at this fucking like banquet kind of thing or whatever. I thought it was gonna be a fucking lynching, and I actually almost got into it. I went nose to nose with Julian Austin, and it was hilarious. I remember saying to something like, I don't know if you're trying to scare me, but I mean, I'm from Hamilton. You might be a big noise in fucking New Brunswick or someplace. Anyway, yeah. Anyway, he immediately got very apologetic. So, and we're actually when I do run into him now, we get along very well. But yeah, I think that was where I just went, well, maybe I should kind of take it easy on these people because, one day and the fucking thing is that, yeah, you look at it, they and I and many of us aren't still doing it anymore. I mean, and many of them are in a way, in a level at which I wish I was, which is not very much. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
After a while, I kind of just figured out that my presence and my tunes are enough to almost do that. And the fact that I probably know more about country music than everybody in this room. And I say that with all due humility, but I mean, I've loved it forever. I mean, I could expect, I've met rock guys who know more about country music than most of my peers at that time,
Well, you seem to have to advocate for yourself as really like probably the only traditional honky-tonk country music band going, like at least actively recording and performing and touring at the time. And like, yeah, why wouldn't people be taking note, I guess? So you were pretty vocal about it. And for me, it's like, just kind of speaks to your devotion to traditional country music. But do you think that open honesty and the slagging closed some doors for you? And if it did, does that bother you?
It probably did. No, it didn't bother me. It bothers me now because, I'm older and we tend to look back on things and you kind of reflect it. And plus, a lot of those guys and we get along great now. But for years, they didn't like me very much. And, but humility or failure is a great leveler. We all took our shot. And, okay, so none of us are actually going to be the next Buck Owens or whoever, or in their case, maybe Garth Brooks or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, we all kind of, every now and then, I mean, I've fought, well, geez, I wish I hadn't said some of those things. But, I'm sure they forgave around the time I felt worst about it. So, it doesn't really get brought up anymore. If it does, it's generally humorous. But it's one of those things. I mean, I did feel I had to make some noise. I had to work twice as hard to get half as far. But we, at one point, we started getting like name checked by like Pete Anderson and Dwight Yoakam would saw interviews where they would, oh man, we saw this kid in Calgary. He was really great. Fucking love. I'm thinking kid now. Wow. He's not much older than me. But, the Mavericks became, for a long time, they thumped the drum pretty good for me. Hanging out down in Nashville and I went to do this, SoCan thing down there. And I mean, I was with, at that time he was kind of doing really, really big stuff. I mean, Jason McCoy and, I think Charlie Major. And, I was with a couple of other guys, Daryl Burgess, who wrote, Just Came Back to Say Goodbye. And, some guys like that. Oh, and Colin Linden. Okay. And, Colin's just a, massive talent. And I had known Colin before because he was pretty good friends with my manager. And, we did a bunch of songs and it was a jam house at this little place in Nashville. And Colin was going to close the night out because he was kind of probably the most prominent guy on the bit of the dais that night. And, he said, absolutely not. I will not close this night. He goes, this is Nashville, man. Scotty, take it away. And it was great. We did, I said, you must know Together Again in A. And he said, yeah, we did. And that was it. And I remember, I don't know, I just remember thinking to myself, fuck, man, I mean, these guys are all doing better than me. And they just handed me this thing to close it out for the night. And we burned it to the ground, man. It was great. That was, the thing was, every time we got the chance, we delivered like in spades. We were a really incredible band. People just 3 and 4 part harmonies and like guys who really understood country music. And, my father was a musician, when he was young, but he didn't, but he always was around country music. And when he came to see my band for the first time, that band with Teddy and those guys, he just said to me, he goes, man,
Yeah.
the Strangers, man.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh, it's fair to say you guys were the only band like that in Canada for that stretch of time, right?
Yeah. Towards the, I guess maybe 3, 4, maybe 5 years before we finished up, we went and we got invited to play Havelock, which is huge, right? It's a big festival. We had done a lot of the Western ones, but I never got treated very well. I shouldn't say treated well. My attention that was given to me in Ontario was limited. But out west, I mean, if I played Calgary, generally I'd get the front page and of the entertainment section, and same with Vancouver. But for some reason in Ontario, I didn't get very much, and so we got invited to do Havelock one year, and so okay, let's do it, and it was with the band, you know, with Joey and Teddy and Teddy and all the guys, and so with the Wardenaires, not the country squire. So me and the Wardenaires head out to Havelock, and we went on just before Gene Watson, and so we're burning through our fucking packed house in the afternoon. It was thousands of people there, and all of a sudden I start looking over to the side of the stage, and I see all these people starting to come up. It's Gene Watson's band, and they're just standing at the side of the stage, fucking hooting and hollering, and they're just like, man, oh man. And then we come down, and so we finished our set. The place went nuts, did an encore, and we're headed back down, and Gene's band's waiting for us as we're coming off, and then we're walking by the bus. Gene Watson's hanging out the window. He doesn't have a shirt on. He's going, whoa, and he's smashing his hands together, and he goes, now that's how it's done. And I went, okay, the guy who sang Paper Rosie and Farewell Party just said that's how it's done. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I got goosebumps just telling you that story. I mean, it was just, when it's like, wow, man, the real thing just said I'm the real thing.
Yeah, I mean, that you can't top that, man.
There's not too many. I mean, there's probably some other stories in my head, but that was a hard day to beat, that's for sure. But I always felt that because we all came from that in such a sincere way. I always felt that if this is seen by people who know, they'll know. You know?
Did you ever consider moving to a place like Nashville or Austin, or were you always kind of just rooted in Hamilton?
Well, Austin wasn't happening when I first kind of got my groove going. At least it wasn't the place. It wasn't like the place that you went to try to do something. It was, there's something going on there, but that was it. And Nashville, no. For the same reasons that I never ever, I never did this full time, was because I was already sort of settled into life. I'd already bought a house, and I had a job I'd been at for many years at that point, and it just, yeah, I mean, I didn't get noticed till I was in my mid-30s, and it's hard to kind of pack it up and just say, you know what, I'm not gonna be a normal citizen anymore. Listen, I would have, but if I'd been 28 instead of 35 or something, it might have happened. But yeah, it's sort of like now. I mean, this pandemic it's nothing I can do about it. But I mean, the ancillary benefit is I haven't spent any money in a year. I had paid off the house about 4 or 5 years ago. Things are really fucking good. I work afternoons, so I never spend any money, period. I've been operating without a car for about the last 5 years, because when I was working in Toronto for Teddy, nobody has a car. So, I mean, when I came back here, I just said, well, I'll see how long I can stretch this out. And I haven't needed one. Occasionally I'll rent one if I need one, but, and I have this sort of a wise guy friend of mine who stashes cars all over town, so I borrow one when I need them. And that's a good thing about Hamilton. There's always a lot of gangland guys around. If you know the right guy, you can always get something done. But
it's a tough town, man.
It is a tough town, and I grew up with this sort of old mob guy, and he's like one of my dearest friends. And so yeah, anyway, if I ever need a car, he always gives me a car. But yeah, so occasionally I'll be asked, now that things are so good, you're kind of flush and this and that. I mean, why do you, hang it up and retire? Well, first of all, I don't have that kind of cash. I mean, and I'm at that age now where that matters. If I didn't have this house at one point, I redid the mortgage and I kind of got myself back on track. But if I didn't have this house, I'd have gone bankrupt about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. But fortunately I had the place and I was able to, but it wound up, it took me, I don't know, took me so long to pay off a house that should have been paid off very fast because, I was always, supplementing music with my own dough.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Like you fronted the bill, like I guess for your recordings, and you released them as well?
Well, Smokin and Drinkin, Teddy and I split on that one. Everything else I did. But yeah, and so that couldn't go on. It just simply couldn't, and it's certainly never going to go on again. I just, it's not that I want to make money on everything I do. In fact, music is something I never really cared if I did make money on. But erosion is like that. After a while, okay, well, I'll pad it this time, or I'll keep it afloat this way, or I'll use this credit card, and then the next thing you know, you're in shit up to your ears, right? So there was that. And
did you shop those records to labels and try to get someone to put it out for you, or were you content to just put it out on your own terms?
I shopped every one. I mean, I came close a couple of times. My manager was the same guy. He managed the Blue Shadows, and of course, by hook and crook, as well, Katie Lang. So they had enough, and they were all ex-Sony guys. So they had enough muscle to get me. I got flown down to Nashville, and they had an imprint that was supposed to be their sort of kind of alt country weirdo fucking label. And I knew as soon as I talked to the guy, he loved me too, but I knew he wasn't going to do it. They weren't going to let him sign me. I don't know why they even brought me down there, but we wound up having a really good time all weekend. So and the others, damned if I recall, I shopped it around a fair bit, but I wound up selling about 28,000 units through a distributor in Australia. It doesn't exist anymore. So I thought to myself, I remember the time, like, why on earth do I need a label at this point?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'll be lucky if I could sell that with a fucking label. And I remember talking to the guys from what the hell? It's a Toronto band, Andy and the guy Maple Music guys, Andy and Josh.
Oh yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. Anyway, they had they sold about, they've been around for about, so say 25 years now, and they that's it.
Yeah.
And they sold about 45,000 of everything they've ever done. And then at one point they got signed to I think it was Warner Brothers. Now through all of that, they've got all the money. And then they signed with Warner Brothers, and they said, look, we're going to, this is what you need to push you over that 50,000 hump. You need us. So they did a 3-album deal or something. The first one sold 50. The second one sold 45. And they got nothing. And so the third one was an option. And they all sat in a room staring at the phone until the clock struck 12 and went, oh, thank God, we're not on a label anymore. So I think I thought about that a lot when the second album, you know what I mean? After that, I remember thinking to myself, I'm not sure what a label could do for a guy like me.
Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you taking the time, and I'd definitely love to talk to you again. Well, friends, I hope you've enjoyed my chat with Scotty Campbell. Big thanks to Scotty for taking the time to talk with me. Listen to Smokin and Drinkin wherever you stream music for a nominal monthly fee, and if you dig a little deeper, you might be able to unearth some of his previous releases and a nice number of live videos that can be found on YouTube. Follow along with the Northern Report Spotify playlist to hear music from the folks that I have covered in the Honky-Tonk Times column, as well as here on the podcast. Remember to subscribe, to like, follow, share, leave us a rating. I appreciate it very much. Our logo was created by Boots Graham of Boots and the Hoots, Central Alberta's finest honky-tonkers. Music on the show today courtesy of Sean Burns and Lost Country, The Divorcees, and Skinny Dick. From local legends to regional stars to the cream of the Canadian crop, you'll find it all here on the Northern Report. Thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll chat later.
Hey,
Hey, bud, what you got?
I won't be blue all day because relief is just a pint glass away.